It was close to 7 on Christmas Eve in Boston. Snow fell in large patient flakes, and the red lanterns strung along Boylston Street threw a soft glow across the pavement. Grace Whitaker eased her silver SUV to the curb and glanced in the rearview mirror. Lucas, her 7-year-old, pressed both palms against the window and puffed a circle of fog on the glass. "Mum, I am starving. Can we get the ginger cookies at Maple Hearth?" Grace smiled and pulled in closer. She still appeared in local magazines now and then. The founder who had sold her clean food company at the right moment, but under the thick coat she was still a young widow who worked very hard to keep the house warm since Michael passed away. She was about to turn off the engine when Lucas pointed. "Mum, someone is back there." Behind the bakery's dumpster, a tall but thin man with a tangle of brown hair bent over a bag that had just been tossed. He did not move like a thief. He moved with care, as if looking for one exact thing. Something old and brown was tucked under one arm, a small notebook with a worn leather cover. Grace hesitated for a heartbeat. The door opened and the cold blew across her face. She loved plans. She wrote them for meals and for charity and for her day. Plans can accept a bend in the road. She said to Lucas, "Stay in the car, please." He shook his head. "I want to bring him cookies." She let out a small breath and nodded. They walked into the drift, the snow crackling under their boots. When Grace spoke, the man started and turned. His face was young. His eyes were grey like a winter pond. There was no shame there, only the kind of tired that settles behind the eyes. "I am not stealing," he said in a hoarse voice. "I am looking for bottles to turn in, and maybe something tossed that can still be used." Lucas held out the warm paper bag. "These are for you. Merry Christmas." The man accepted the gift, awkward but grateful. He held the notebook a little tighter like a keepsake. Grace looked at the cover. "What is that?" He paused. "My grandmother's recipe book," he said. "I am Daniel Brooks. People call me Danny." "I am Grace," she said. "This is Lucas. We have a fire going in our kitchen. If you want warmth, come in for a bit. On a night like this, no one should be outside." Danny studied them. Wariness crossed his face, then exhaustion overcame it. He nodded. "Thank you." The iron gate swung open. The SUV rolled over crushed stone to the brick house at the end of a short row of historic homes. The porch tree glowed with tiny lights. Grace led them through the front door. The air held a faint scent of cinnamon and orange peel. She tried to keep that scent alive since Michael died. "Kitchen is in the back," she said. "You can shower if you want. I will make cocoa for Lucas." Danny paused in the living room. The family photos hung in a gentle line. Michael holding toddler Lucas. Grace with a spray of sunflowers on the day she opened her first store. Danny did not stare. He understood there was a story here that he did not belong to. When he stepped into the kitchen, Lucas had already dragged a chair to the counter and held a wooden spoon like a conductor. "Mum said cheesecake tonight," he announced. "But I want soup." Grace laughed. "Are you the boss of this kitchen?" Danny opened the notebook. The pages were the color of tea. A corner was chipped. He stopped at a leaf stained with oil, the handwriting firm and neat. "Chicken and dumplings," he said. "My grandmother May used to make this. If you have flour and a little chicken, it is a good thing for a cold night." There was nothing boastful in his tone, and nothing meek. It was a simple offer from someone who had stood a long time at a stove. Grace checked the refrigerator. She had chicken and carrots, and celery and flour. She nodded. "Cook," she said. "I will be your helper." Danny washed his hands. His movements were easy and sure. The knife sounded a steady rhythm on the board. Chicken fat hit the pan with a soft sear. Celery sent up its sharp green perfume and then mellowed. He mixed dough and dropped tender rounds into the simmering stock. Lucas rested his chin on his hands and watched without blinking. Grace took the first spoonful and her throat tightened. The soup was simple, but it reached some quiet place she had not touched for a long time. It did not taste like Michael's cooking. It tasted like safety, all the same. She looked up and met Danny's eyes. To her surprise, she felt her shoulders lower. Lucas leaned in. "Tell me about your Grandma May," he said. Danny smiled. She grew up in Georgia. She said food keeps people at the same table, even when they are mad at each other. She wrote every recipe as if she was writing a letter to our future. Eat now before the dumplings soak up the whole pot. Grace woke to coffee and the sound of a spoon tapping a cast-iron pan. She stepped into the kitchen and saw Danny in the sweater Lucas had found for him turning eggs. A plate of cornbread cooled next to the stove. Lucas sat on a stool with a dusting of flour on his chin. "You do not have to cook," Grace said, but the words lost their edge in the warmth. "I need to use my hands," Danny said. "Out there, people look at me like I am not a person anymore. In a kitchen, at least, I can be useful." Grace looked down at the notebook. She turned its pages slowly. Some words had been crossed out and rewritten with a blue pen. Near the end, an old line in brown ink shimmered through a smudge. "Cook. As if you are in love with someone, even when no one will eat." She closed the book. She thought of the way he had held it behind the bakery like the last part of his dignity. She asked, "Where did you work before?" He rubbed a thumb over the skillet edge. "In a well-known kitchen by the river. I was the youngest on the line. I had a few new ideas. An older co-worker borrowed them and won a prize. I complained. I got labelled a thief. I was fired and blacklisted from other kitchens. My parents said I brought shame on the family. I drove deliveries and did some heavy lifting. Then I ran out of couches to sleep on." Lucas sat still as if he were hearing a bedtime story. Grace pulled up a chair. "I am sorry," she said. "In this town, power gets to talk faster than truth." Danny shrugged. Everybody has to keep moving. That day he noticed a split seam on the arm of Lucas's old teddy bear and stitched it closed with tiny, even work. Lucas cheered like he had a new toy. That night they baked. The kitchen began to feel alive. Michael's photos stayed where they were. The feeling in the house changed anyway. It did not betray grief. It made a path through it. 3 days passed like a dream with a heartbeat. Danny kept a careful distance. He did not ask question he had no right to ask. He never entered a room unless Grace invited him. He cleaned the kitchen so well that Grace felt faintly ashamed for how long she had treated it like a lab with no soul. Lucas called him Uncle Danny, then slipped and called him Teacher Danny because he said he learned to count from the jars of spices. Late on the 4th night, Grace worked in her home office until near midnight. When she returned to the kitchen, the notebook lay open. One page hung by a thread from the spine the recipe for orange cake from May. A tiny heart had been drawn in pencil at the corner. A dark coffee stain almost hid a line in the middle. In the morning, Danny came down and froze. The torn sheet had been repaired and slipped into a clear sleeve. Its faded ink had been coaxed back to legibility using a simple paper conservation method that a friend at a museum had taught Grace. At the bottom of the page, a line Danny had written years before now read cleanly. "Do not be afraid to add more sugar. People always need a little sweet on a bad day." He looked up. Grace leaned on the counter with a mug between her hands. "Some memories are worth saving," she said. "People are like that too." Danny looked down and swallowed. He did not try for polite words. He only spread his palm over the sleeve as if checking the forehead of a relative after a fever. A neighbor's message arrived first, then a photo posted through a window, then a flood. The headline said a wealthy woman had taken in a homeless man. Comments sank into the muck fast. People wrote that Grace was staging a scene to promote herself. Others called Danny a gold digger who had targeted a young widow and her child. Grace shut her laptop, but Danny had already seen a screen on someone else's phone. The words seemed to hiss against the skin. He stepped back. His mouth went pale. "I have to go," he said. "No," Grace said at once. "You did nothing wrong." He met her eyes. "This is your world. Reputations, boards, funders, reporters. You also have Lucas. I will not be the reason anyone uses to hurt you. I know how to leave quietly." Lucas clutched the mended bear. "Where are you going?" Danny knelt. "I need to go for a while. I will find my way." "I do not want you to go," Lucas said. "Mum, tell him to stay." Grace touched her son's shoulder. She turned to Danny. "Stay. Let me face the noise in the way I always have. It is not about your strength," he said. "It is about whether I have any right to become the excuse for cruel people to attack you. I will not take that right." He held the notebook warm from the kitchen. He walked out under heavy snow that fell like the curtain drawn in the middle of a play. The door closed and left a person-shaped silence in the room. That night, Lucas cried until he fell asleep on the sofa. Grace sat alone in the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. She looked at food she had never really known how to use. She opened the notebook. She chose the chicken soup with dumplings again. She cut the carrots crooked. The dough went tough. The pot boiled over. She laughed and cried at the same time at how clumsy she was. When she ladled the first bowl, Lucas sat up and sniffed. He tasted a spoonful. "It is not like Uncle Danny," he said, "but it smells like our house." Grace put down the ladle. For the first time in a year, she cried without feeling guilty for surviving. The tears were not a sentence. They were a balm. In the morning, Grace opened every contact list: churches, shelters, community kitchens. She walked streets she usually passed in a car. She asked after Danny in stores where people gather when it is cold. No one knew. The answer repeated: people do not stay long when they are only a shadow at a doorway. She returned home after dark. Lucas held the bear and looked up. "Did you find him?" "Not yet," she said. "I will not stop." She set up a small fund inside her charity work and called it Warm Table. Instead of planning another dressed-up gala, she asked her team to focus on kitchens that already existed and to reduce food waste across the city. She registered at food banks and stood in line as others did, not for a photograph, only to learn. In one place, a man asked her how to make dumplings when there was no baking powder. In another, she ran a finger over the embossed cover of an older woman's recipe book and understood that people can love a recipe the way they love a person. She cooked every night. Not every dish worked. Lucas ate anyway. The first orange cake burned at the edges. He said the dark rim tasted like a crunchy crown. They both laughed as if they had invented a private secret. Late December, a year later, the old theatre in Back Bay shone for a fundraiser for Warm Table. It did not look too polished. On stage were cooks from community kitchens telling their stories by way of their dishes. Grace stood in the wings and peeked through the curtain. She did not hide the hope that a certain outline might appear in the far doorway. Just as the host called her name, she saw a figure near the wall in the dim edge of the lights. A dark coat. A knit cap pulled low. He stood like a person who wanted both to see and not to be seen. She recognized the grey eyes before anything else. Her heart hammered so hard she had to grip the table to steady herself. She left the stage before anyone understood. She did not wind carefully between tables. She went straight through. Words in the room dimmed like sound sliding under a door. "Danny," she said softly when she reached him. He straightened. He turned part way as if to leave. She was already in front of him. "I am sorry I disappeared," he said. He stopped, then changed the words. "I am sorry. I did not want to bring trouble on you and on Lucas. I thought leaving was best." She looked at him and felt warmth and ache at once. She did not ask where he had been. His face answered. She reached into her coat and brought out a small parcel wrapped in plain brown paper. She set it in his hands. He opened the wrap. A simple and beautiful hard-bound book lay in his palms. The cover showed an old cast-iron pot. The title read, "The Porchlight Recipes." Under it was the author, Daniel Brooks. He opened to the first page. The dedication was plain. "For those who were forgotten, if you remember a scent, you have not vanished." He touched a chapter. Orange Cake from May. The page had been restored with the pencil heart intact. He looked up. "How did you do this?" Grace spoke low. "I did not publish it for stores. I made a small artisan run, one book for each kitchen that Warm Table supports. Each kitchen is a chapter. Each story is a recipe. But this one is only yours. I want to say in front of people that you taught me what a warm table means." The noise of the hall faded like someone turned a dial. People watched a woman place a book into the hands of a man with grey eyes and a shy smile. Prejudice gave way a little when a story had a real object to cling to. A book. A life. "Come home," Grace said. "There is a place set for you at our table." Danny pressed his lips together like a man who sees a last bridge finally finished. He nodded very slowly. The old brick house now had a simple wooden porch in the backyard. Strings of small lights hung at the edges and looked like low stars. Dishes steamed on long tables. The kitchen rang with conversation and clinking spoons. Beneath the porch roof, Lucas held a basket of petals and looked very serious in the white shirt he disliked. He still nodded every time Grace reminded him to straighten his collar. Friends from community kitchens stood with neighbors and relatives. No one cared whether the silver matched the cloth. Warmth mattered. When the officiant finished the brief service, Lucas drew a long breath and tossed petals over Grace and Danny. Laughter went up like a choir. Danny took Grace's hand. The yellow bulbs threw firefly glints in their eyes. Inside the house, a small frame hung on a shelf. In it rested the original page that had been saved. Below the frame, a brass tag carried the line May had written. "Cook as if you are in love with someone, even when no one will eat." There were no reporters that night. No hot takes. A guitar played quietly in a corner of the yard. Spoons touched pot rims. The porch light the name Grace and Danny had chosen for their community kitchen opened every midday to anyone who needed soup and a story. In the evening, it became a classroom. Danny taught how to build a broth from bones and from overlooked scraps. Grace taught how to introduce a dish with respect for where it was born. Lucas sat in the back, volunteering to wash dishes so he could listen to more stories about May. Spring reached the city. Their kitchen filled with the sound of children's shoes and the voices of old neighbors telling how streets used to be. Danny moved among tables and looked at faces waiting for orange cake to rise. He was no longer a blurred figure in a cruel post. He was Teacher Danny and Uncle Danny and Grace's husband, and the man who pulled out a chair for a woman with a tired knee. In the corner, Grace watched him. There was no longer a shadow of guilt in her eyes for daring to be happy after sorrow. She had chosen to live as if the heart can mend itself when it is offered warmth every day. One early summer evening, Lucas ran into the kitchen waving a crumpled paper. "My teacher said to write one sentence about family," he announced. "I wrote that my family smells like oranges and celery. Is that right?" Danny laughed. Grace kissed his hair. "That is more than right." By the end of that year, Warm Table no longer held a fundraiser in a theatre. They closed a city block for a long table in the open air. Everyone who came brought a family recipe. Stories bridged from hand to hand by way of spoons. The only speech was from a brown-haired man who stood and spoke in a voice that shook. "I used to be a shadow, moving past a doorway. One night a mother and a child opened their door for me. They did not ask if I deserved dinner. They put a pot on the stove. I remembered who I was. If anyone here needs to hear this, you are not a shadow. You are a person. You deserve a hot bowl of soup and a seat at the table." Silence held for a few seconds, and then hands met and spoons chimed, and the sound rose like a heartbeat saying that belonged to everyone. Later, when the tables were cleared, Grace sat against the brick wall with a cup of tea. Danny spread a small cloth on the step and set down a warm slice of orange cake. Lucas slept with his head on her shoulder. Night moved through the yard like a familiar friend. Grace lifted her eyes to the frame on the wall, where the old page rested in quiet safety. She touched Danny's wrist. "Welcome home," she said. Danny looked at her, and his grey eyes no longer held winter. They held the soft light of summer under a porch, and the promise of a table where there was always one chair more than needed. "Thank you for keeping the porch light on," he said. Under that light, love did not need big promises. It showed itself in the way a person stirred a pot in the right direction, in the way an extra spoon was placed by a bowl, in the way a child wrote that family smells like oranges. If the night breeze shifted, you could almost hear May laughing as if to say that when a recipe is remembered, a person is remembered. And when a person is remembered, a neighborhood does not go hungry. Not only for food, but for kindness laid out where everyone can reach it. They sat a long time while the porch light flickered gently in the wind. No one turned it off. They let it burn as a sign. Anyone who walked down that street and needed a place to stop would know someone was waiting, and supper would still be warm.